Chapter 11 Part A. When the last of the guests had driven away, I went back into the inner hall and found Samuel at the side table, presiding over the brandy and soda water. My lady and Miss Rachel came out of the drawing room, followed by the two gentlemen. Mr. Godfrey had some brandy and soda water. Mr. Franklin took nothing. He sat down, looking dead tired. The talking on this birthday occasion had, I suppose, been too much for him. My lady, turning round to wish them good night, looked hard at the wicked Colonel's legacy shining in her daughter's dress. "Rachel," she asked, "where are you going to put your diamond tonight?" Miss Rachel was in high good spirits, just in that humor for talking nonsense, and perversely persisting in it as if it was sense, which you may sometimes have observed in young girls, when they are highly wrought up, at the end of an exciting day. First, she declared she didn't know where to put the diamond. Then she said, on her dressing table, of course, along with her other things. Then she remembered that the diamond might take to shining of itself, with its awful moony light in the dark, and that would terrify her in the dead of night. Then she bethought herself of an Indian cabinet which stood in her sitting room, and instantly made up her mind to put the Indian diamond in the Indian cabinet, for the purpose of permitting two beautiful native productions to admire each other. Having let her little flow of nonsense run on as far as that point, her mother interposed and stopped her. "My dear, your Indian cabinet has no lock to it," says my lady. "Good heavens, Mamma," cried Miss Rachel, "is this an hotel? Are there thieves in the house?" Without taking notice of this fantastic way of talking, my lady wished the gentleman good night. She next turned to Miss Rachel, and kissed her. "Why not let me keep the diamond for you tonight?" she asked. Miss Rachel received that proposal as she might, 10 years since, have received a proposal to part her from a new doll. My lady saw there was no reasoning with her that night. "Come into my room, Rachel, the first thing tomorrow morning," she said. "I shall have something to say to you." With those last words she left us slowly, thinking her own thoughts, and, to all appearance, not best pleased with the way by which they were leading her. Miss Rachel was the next to say good night. She shook hands first with Mr. Godfrey, who was standing at the other end of the hall, looking at a picture. Then she turned back to Mr. Franklin, still sitting weary and silent in a corner. What words passed between them I can't say. But standing near the old oak frame which holds our large looking-glass, I saw her reflected in it, slyly slipping the locket which Mr. Franklin had given to her, out of the bosom of her dress, and showing it to him for a moment, with a smile which certainly meant something out of the common, before she tripped off to bed. This incident staggered me a little in the reliance I had previously felt on my own judgment. I began to think that Penelope might be right about the state of her young lady's affections, after all. As soon as Miss Rachel left him eyes to see with, Mr. Franklin noticed me. His variable humor, shifting about everything, had shifted about the Indians already. "Betteridge," he said, "I'm half inclined to think I took Mr. Murthwaite too seriously, when we had the talk in the shrubbery. I wonder whether he has been trying any of his traveler's tales on us?" "Do you really mean to let the dogs loose?" "I'll relieve them of their collars, sir," I answered, "and leave them free to take a turn in the night, if they smell a reason for it." "All right," says Mr. Franklin. "We'll see what is to be done tomorrow. I am not at all disposed to alarm my aunt, Betteridge, without a very pressing reason for it. Good night." He looked so worn and pale as he nodded to me, and took his candle to go upstairs, that I ventured to advise his having a drop of brandy and water, by way of nightcap. Mr. Godfrey, walking towards us from the other end of the hall, backed me. He pressed Mr. Franklin, in the friendliest manner, to take something, before he went to bed. I only note these trifling circumstances, because, after all I had seen and heard, that day, it pleased me to observe that our two gentlemen were on just as good terms as ever. Their warfare of words, heard by Penelope in the drawing-room, and their rivalry for the best place in Miss Rachel's good graces, seemed to have set no serious difference between them. But there, they were both good-tempered, and both men of the world. And there is certainly this merit in people of station, that they are not nearly so quarrelsome among each other as people of no station at all. Mr. Franklin declined the brandy and water, and went upstairs with Mr. Godfrey, their rooms being next door to each other. On the landing, however, either his cousin persuaded him, or he veered about and changed his mind as usual. "Perhaps I may want it in the night," he called down to me. "Send up some brandy and water into my room." I sent up Samuel with the brandy and water, and then went out and unbuckled the dogs' collars. They both lost their heads with astonishment on being set loose at the time of night, and jumped upon me like a couple of puppies. However, the rain soon cooled them down again. They lapped a drop of water each, and crept back into their kennels. As I went into the house, I noticed signs in the sky which betokened a break in the weather for the better. For the present, it still poured heavily, and the ground was in a perfect sop. Samuel and I went all over the house, and shut up as usual. I examined everything myself, and trusted nothing to my deputy on this occasion. All was safe and fast when I rested my old bones in bed, between midnight and 1 in the morning. The worries of the day had been a little too much for me, I suppose. At any rate, I had a touch of Mr. Franklin's malady that night. It was sunrise before I fell off at last into a sleep. All the time I lay awake the house was as quiet as the grave. Not a sound stirred but the splash of the rain, and the sighing of the wind among the trees as a breeze sprang up with the morning. About 7:30 I woke, and opened my window on a fine sunshiny day. The clock had struck 8, and I was just going out to chain up the dogs again, when I heard a sudden whisking of petticoats on the stairs behind me. I turned about, and there was Penelope flying down after me like mad. "Father," she screamed, "come upstairs, for God's sake. The diamond is gone."